The monitor had been screaming for 11 seconds when Nurse Elise Tran pressed her palms into the man's sternum for the 17th time and refused to stop. The bay was bright, too bright. Riverview General kept the trauma bays lit like operating theaters even when they weren't, which Elise had always thought was sensible until tonight, when the brightness meant that everyone in the corridor could see exactly what was happening through the long pane of glass. And there were a lot of people in the corridor. Dr. Hartwell had been paged 4 minutes ago. No response. Dr. Feldman was in surgery. The charge nurse, Gord, had gone to find a defibrillator cart because the one in Bay 3 had been acting up since Tuesday and nobody had put in the repair ticket. That left Elise, 22 months out of the nursing program at Dalhousie, standing alone with a man whose heart had stopped, in a room full of light with a glass wall. She felt the compressions in her shoulders now. Her hands had stopped feeling things after the first minute. The door behind her opened. Tran, she knew the voice. She did not stop. Nurse Tran stepped back from the patient. His name was Clifford Prentice. He was the chief executive officer of Riverview Health Group, which owned Riverview General, which owned the building she was standing in, which technically owned the linoleum under her shoes. He had a face like a man who had spent 20 years being right about things, and he used it now, standing in the doorway in a charcoal suit that had probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Step back from the patient," he said again. "There are people in this corridor I need you to be aware of." Elise did not step back from the patient. "He's in arrest," she said. The words came out flat, rhythmic, because she was still counting in her head. 17, 18, 19. His name is Adrian. He's 41 years old. He came in with chest pain 40 minutes ago, and his troponin was, "I am asking you to step back. I can't do that." There was a silence. In it, she heard the sound of the corridor, the murmur of voices, the soft shuffle of good shoes on polished floor. She did not look up. She was watching Adrian's face, watching for the flush of color that would tell her something was moving, watching for any sign that she was doing something that mattered. Prentice stepped into the bay. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Nurse Tran." His voice had gone quiet in the way that things go quiet right before something breaks. "This is not a request. We have a delegation from Meridian Capital in this building tonight. This is a formal site visit. This corridor, this bay, is part of the route. I need you to move." "Get your hand off me," Elise said. He did not move his hand. "The patient can be transferred to Bay 7. He's in cardiac arrest." "You don't move a patient in cardiac arrest. That is a clinical decision that doctor—" "There is no doctor. I'm the only one here. If I step back, he dies." The word landed in the room. Prentice looked at her hand, looked at the monitor, looked at the glass wall behind him where 5 people in blazers were standing very still watching. "I'll accept that clinical outcome," he said, "given the circumstances." Elise heard those words. She filed them somewhere in the back of her mind in a place she'd learned to use during nursing school, a place where things went when she couldn't afford to feel them and still keep her hands moving. She'd put a lot of things there over the last 11 seconds, and she put those words there too behind everything else, in the dark. 23, 24, 25. Gord came back with the defibrillator cart at minute 4.5. He saw Prentice, he saw the glass wall. He set the cart down very carefully, as though it were made of something fragile, and looked at Elise. "Charging?" he said. "Charging," she said. She heard Prentice leave the room. Adrian's heart came back at minute 7. It was not a dramatic moment, it never was. The monitor changed its sound. His color shifted, barely perceptibly. His chest moved differently under her hands. Gord said, "There it is," very quietly, the way he always said things, and Elise lifted her palms and stood back and felt the tremor in her forearms that she hadn't noticed while she was working. She thought, "He's alive." She did not think anything else for a while. Dr. Hartwell arrived at minute 9, still pulling on her coat, and took over. She had clearly run from somewhere. Her hair was loose. She looked at the chart, looked at the monitor, looked at Elise. "You held compression for 7 minutes alone?" "Gord was here for the last 2.5. "You held compression alone for 4.5 minutes. There wasn't anyone else." Hartwell looked at her for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then she looked back at the monitor. "Go write your notes," she said. "Good work." Elise went to write her notes. She was halfway through the incident documentation when someone from administration came to tell her that Clifford Prentice had placed her on immediate administrative leave. The thing about being placed on leave is that they don't always tell you why in a way that feels real. The woman from administration, Elise would not remember her name afterward, only her lanyard, which was purple, spoke in complete sentences that sounded like they had been written by someone else, and when Elise asked if this was because of what had happened in Bay 3, the woman said that she wasn't in a position to confirm or deny the specifics of the situation. Elise asked if the patient was stable. The woman said she wasn't in a position to confirm or deny. Elise asked if she should come back tomorrow. The woman said she would receive a letter. She drove home. Her car was a 2019 Civic with a heater that worked sometimes and a crack in the passenger mirror that she'd been meaning to have fixed since February. The roads were wet. It had rained during her shift, one of those February rains that can't decide if it wants to be sleet, and the streetlights were doing strange things on the pavement. She thought about Adrian's face. She thought about his chart, 41, presenting with radiating chest pain and diaphoresis, history of hypertension, troponin at no 18 when she last checked. She thought about whether anyone had called his family. She thought about Prentice's hand on her shoulder, the weight of it, the certainty of it, the way he had looked through the glass at the people in blazers and calculated something. I'll accept that clinical outcome. She had put those words in the dark place. But the dark place was having trouble holding them tonight. Her hands had finally stopped shaking by the time she got home. The letter arrived by email at 7:43 the next morning. It was 3 paragraphs. The first said that she was being placed on a period of administrative review. The second said this was not a disciplinary action. The third said she should contact HR to schedule an intake meeting. She read it 3 times. Then she got up and made coffee and stood at her kitchen window looking at the street. Across the road, her neighbor Mrs. Dupuis was already out shoveling what turned out not to be snow, just frost, from her front steps. She was 81 and she shoveled every morning regardless. Elise had always found this admirable. She found it admirable now in a way that also made her chest feel hollow. She called Gord. He answered on the second ring. He was still at the hospital. He'd pulled a double. She could hear the specific acoustic of the nursing station behind him, the particular layering of beeps and voices that she'd been listening to for almost 2 years, that she hadn't realized she would miss until this moment. I heard, he said. About the leave? About all of it, Elise. He paused. The patient's family was here this morning. He has a daughter. She came in from Moncton overnight. Elise held the phone. He's stable, Gord said. He's asking for whoever saved his life. I told him there was a nurse named Tran who held compressions for 7 minutes. She didn't say anything. You should know one other thing, Gord said. There's some paperwork being processed. From what I can tell, Prentice is trying to frame this as a protocol deviation. The argument is that you should have transferred the patient to Bay 7 when instructed at Gord. You can't transfer a patient in cardiac arrest. I know that. Every nurse in this building knows that. I know that too. He exhaled. I'm telling you what the paperwork says, not what I think. I think you did what any nurse who knows anything would have done. But whatever is happening on the administrative side, it's moving fast. She thanked him. She put down the phone. She stood at the window for a while longer. Mrs. Dupuis finished her steps and went inside. The street was very quiet. It was the kind of Wednesday morning that didn't know anything had happened. She spent the next 3 days doing the things that people do when their lives have been disrupted, and they don't know how to be disrupted properly. She cleaned her apartment. She went for walks along the waterfront, which in February meant leaning into wind that came off the harbor like something with intent. She called her mother in Truro and had a conversation in which she said that everything was fine. She pulled out her nursing college registration and read it as though it might tell her something she'd forgotten. She drank more coffee than was good for her. On the 3rd evening, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. The man on the other end said his name was Colonel Warren Aldecoa. He said he understood she was the nurse who had saved a man's life in Bay 3 of Riverview General 3 days ago. Elise said yes. He said he'd been trying to reach her through the hospital, and the hospital had not been cooperative, so he'd gotten her number through a contact of his in the Halifax Regional Health Authority. He said he hoped she didn't mind. She said she didn't mind. He said, the man you saved is a former Master Corporal in the Canadian Armed Forces. His name is Adrian Bouchard. He served 2 tours in Kandahar and 1 in Mali. He was decorated twice. When he came into your emergency room that night, he was 3 weeks out of a VA appointment where he'd been told his cardiac symptoms were anxiety. He has a daughter who is 11 years old. He coaches minor hockey in Dartmouth. A pause. He would like to speak with you if you're willing. But that's not actually why I'm calling. Elise waited. I'm calling, said Colonel Aldecoa, because I have a meeting tomorrow morning with the board of Riverview Health Group, and I was wondering if you might be available to come in. She did not sleep well that night. She made a list of things she knew to be true, and a separate list of things she was less certain about, which is something she'd started doing in her 2nd year of nursing school when the volume of information got too large to hold without some kind of system. The first list was short, the second list was longer. She fell asleep around 2 in the morning with the list still open on the kitchen table. She arrived at Riverview General at 8:45. She'd worn her good coat, the navy wool one her mother had helped her pick out for job interviews. She had not been in the building since the night of her leave, and the smell of the lobby, antiseptic and something floral from the gift shop, and the particular staleness of recycled hospital air hit her in a way she hadn't expected. She stood still for a moment. A porter went past with a cart. Someone laughed somewhere down a corridor. The building was doing what it always did, being a hospital, indifferent to the specifics of any one night. Colonel Aldecoa was waiting near the elevators. He was taller than she'd imagined from his voice, mid-50s, salt and pepper, wearing a uniform that he wore the way people wear things they've been wearing for 30 years. He shook her hand. His grip was brief and direct. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I almost didn't," she said, which was true. "I know. Gord told me." The corner of his mouth moved. "He speaks highly of you." The boardroom was on the 4th floor. She had never been on the 4th floor before. The carpets were different up here, thicker. The windows looked out over the Bedford Basin, and the water was gray this morning, the surface riffled by wind. Prentice was already there. He saw her, and something moved through his face, not quite surprise, more like a recalculation, the expression of a man who is always adding things up and has just been handed a new number. Beside him were two people she didn't recognize, both in suits. A woman near the window had a legal pad. A man at the end of the table had a laptop open. There were three other people she also didn't know, two women and a man, who sat apart from the Prentice group in a way that suggested they were not part of it. Colonel Aldecoa introduced them. One of the women was from the Canadian Forces Health Services Group. The man was from the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. The second woman was from the Office of the Inspector General of the Canadian Armed Forces, and her name was Dr. Marion Tessier, and she had a face that gave away nothing and a voice that gave away less. Prentice said he wasn't sure what this meeting was. Aldecoa said, "It's a conversation about what happened in Bay 3 on the night of February 11th, and what's going to happen next." Elise was not asked to speak first. She sat to Aldecoa's left, across from Prentice, and she kept her hands flat on the table because she'd read somewhere that this was grounding and it seemed to be helping. She looked at the window. The water was still gray. A container ship was moving slowly toward the Narrows. Prentice made his case. It was organized. He'd clearly had legal support preparing it. He used words like protocol and chain of command and operational context and investor confidence. He said that Bay 3 was part of a designated tour route. He said that the patient had not yet been officially triaged under the highest priority classification at the time of the redirection request. He said that Nurse Tran had been given a direct instruction by the CEO of the organization and had declined to follow it, which constituted an issue of professional conduct. He did not say the words he had said to her in Bay 3. He did not say, "I'll accept that clinical outcome." But Elise had written those words down. She had written them down that night, in her incident notes, exactly as they had been spoken, with the timestamp, and she had also written them in a personal record she kept on her phone, with the timestamp and her signature, and a description of everything she had witnessed in that room, from the moment Prentice had walked through the door. She had done this not because she'd known she would need it, but because she was a nurse and nurses document things. She had been taught that documentation is the last line of defense between what happened and what someone claims happened, and she had believed it, and tonight she was grateful for it. Dr. Tessier asked her to walk through the events of the evening. She did. She spoke for 6 minutes without stopping. She had not prepared what she was going to say. She found that she didn't need to, because she had been through it so many times in her own head that the sequence was simply there, clear and in order, the way a good chart is clear and in order. She described the patient. She described his presentation. She described the timeline. She described what she had done and why. She described what Prentice had said, including the specific words, and she said that her documentation of those words was time-stamped and available. Prentice looked at her when she finished. She looked back at him. The woman from the College of Nursing asked a question about standard of care. The woman from Health Services asked about defibrillator availability and why it had been unavailable. The man at the laptop typed. Dr. Tessier wrote something on her legal pad. Aldecoa said very quietly, "Clifford." She was doing CPR alone for 4.5 minutes on a man whose heart was stopped, and you put your hand on her shoulder and told her to step back, so that you wouldn't have to explain a medical emergency to people who were thinking about giving you money. Prentice said that the situation was more complicated than that. "His name," said Aldecoa, "is Adrian Bouchard. He served in Kandahar. He was awarded the Medal of Military Valor for pulling 2 soldiers out of a burning vehicle under direct fire. He is 41 years old and he has a daughter. He is alive today because this nurse, and here he did something she hadn't expected. He turned to look at her, directly, without performance, just looked at her the way people look at things they want to remember, refused to move." The room was quiet. The container ship was almost at the Narrows now. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Elise did not know, walking in, what the outcome would be. She still didn't know when it ended, not exactly, because the things that were said in that room had consequences that would take weeks and months to work themselves out in ways that couldn't be reduced to a single moment. But she knew some things. She knew that Clifford Prentice left the building that afternoon and did not come back. She knew that an internal review was announced publicly 3 days later, covering patient safety protocols, visitor tour routing policies, and the incident of February 11th specifically. She knew that the review was led not by anyone from Riverview Health Group's internal structure, but by an external body, because the College of Nursing and the office of Dr. Tessier had both recommended as much. She knew that Adrian Bouchard's daughter sent her a card. It was a small card, pale blue, the kind you buy at a pharmacy. The daughter's name was Charlotte, and she was 11, and she had written, "Thank you for not giving up," in handwriting that leaned to the left, and she had drawn a small star in the corner. Elise kept that card on her fridge for a long time. She knew that Gord got a commendation he deserved and was embarrassed by, because that was who Gord was. She knew that the defibrillator in Bay 3 was repaired within 48 hours, and that a new policy was drafted requiring all equipment to be logged weekly. She knew that this had been one of her specific requests to the review committee, not retribution, not headlines, but the thing she'd actually been thinking about when she was sitting in her car in the parking lot with her hands finally still. What would stop this from happening to the next nurse, the next patient, the next night? She knew that those were not easy things to ask for, that they were unglamorous, procedural, and unlikely to make anyone feel heroically satisfied. She asked for them anyway. She went back to work on the last Tuesday of February. It was cold, the kind of cold that makes Halifax look like a photograph of itself, still and blue and very clean. She parked in the same spot she always parked. She walked through the same lobby. She nodded at the same porter, who nodded back and did not say anything because he was not that kind of person, and she was glad. She changed in the locker room. She clipped her badge. She pulled her hair back the way she always pulled it back, with the same elastic she'd been using since Thursday because she kept forgetting to buy new ones. She walked to the nursing station on the second floor, and Gord was there, writing something, and he looked up when she came in. "Coffee's fresh," he said. "Good," she said. She sat down and opened the first chart of the day. Down the corridor, somewhere in the building, a monitor beeped, then another. Then the sound sorted itself back into the specific layered frequency of a hospital in the morning, people doing work that mattered quietly the way it was almost always done. Elise began to read.